Hey there. Hi, guys. I'm not sure how many of you are in the UK, at least, are up at 1 o'clock in the morning. It just had Easter Sunday and Easter Monday. Maybe you're up late because it's the holidays, but I wanted to return to the issue of Notre Dame. And as usual, I want to bring you a compilation of things which I felt were really important that are being said in terms of the anomalies, some of the interesting facts which I feel haven't been discussed elsewhere. So I want to talk to you about them, and also to look back into this date, April the 15th, see what happened in history, because that is also quite interesting. And then we might, from that, explore the astrology, some symbolism, and see if we can come to a conclusion of what this is all about. So I think I might start by saying that I watched an interview with the chief architect who'd worked at Notre Dame up until, I think it was about 2014. His name is Benjamin Mouton, and his interview on French TV is on YouTube, so you can have a look at it yourself. What he was saying is that he's absolutely flabbergasted that these old oak beams caught fire. Now, what they're saying is they wouldn't even be able to replicate these oak beams right now because there are no trees that are that tall anywhere to be found in France or elsewhere. So it just goes to show the rate we are going through our trees because they're not being able to grow to a sufficient size. For example, the trees that went into Notre Dame were 400 years old when they went in there. So this Benjamin Mouton, who was the chief architect, he said he couldn't emphasize enough how stunned he was that this wood caught fire at that rate. He said that particular wood, oak, doesn't catch fire very easily, especially because it is so old and so dense. He says it needs kindling, a lot of kindling, which I would interpret as being an accelerant in order to get it to catch. What someone else pointed out on a vlog was if you look at the pictures, the entirety of every beam is on fire. And she drew the analogy of when you do what we would call in South Africa a braai or a barbecue. It takes a while to stoke the fire so that every little piece of charcoal there, hi there, how's it, Leaflet? So that every little bit of charcoal and every little briquette or bit of newspaper catches light. And it actually takes a long time in an open air fire to stoke them. So this guy was incredulous that these beams, every inch of them across the entirety of the roof, going in the shape of a cross, every inch of it had caught fire and that the fire had moved so quickly. He also said that the issue of a short circuit was impossible because the whole electrics had been redone in 2011, and all the fuse boxes, all the places where a short circuit could occur, were all in the stairwells where they were protected. So he said the electrics were done with fantastic quality control to the most recent stringent standards, and there was no way that a short circuit or an electrical problem could have sparked this. He also said that in the area where the fire started, there was no work happening. People said that day, all they'd done was put up more scaffolding and no work had been done at all. And in that particular area, there was no electrics, nothing that could spark this up. The engineer, or the oak architect Benjamin Mouton, was also saying that there are security cameras and detectors all over the roof and 2 permanent guards downstairs on security monitoring conditions. He said that the very initial spark should have been detected and there should have been action immediately. So there was no excuse for it getting out of control. So he finds it both unlikely that it would have got that out of control, bearing in mind the type of wood and the structure, which he's very au fait with. And plus, he couldn't emphasize enough the quality control, the standards, everything was up to scratch in terms of regulations. He also said that the incidences of fire in buildings while they are being restored is extremely low. It's minimal. So when the press originally came out and were telling us, oh, well, it's very dangerous, the buildings are very fragile, this can happen when it's being restored, he kind of refutes that and says it just doesn't happen when buildings are being restored. They used a lot, if you're watching in the UK media, the example of York Minster Cathedral, which was burnt. But if you note, that was back in the early 80s. So that's quite a long time ago. Standards have changed, procedures have changed a lot since then, and so has technology. So I don't think it's a fair comparison. So I'm just kind of wondering, what did cause this? So let's look a little bit further. Did you notice when you saw all the pictures, both on television and afterwards, the flame was like quite a light orange. It wasn't that deep rust kind of flame, was it? That reddy orange flame. It was quite a light, almost fluorescent orange, and the smoke was white. Another vlogger talked about this, and she said she'd been doing research on fires, and she'd noticed this phenomenon occurring more regularly. Particularly, she mentioned the California wildfires. I did my own research on some websites, and I found out white smoke and the lighter orange flame indicates that it was burning at an extremely high heat. So, outdoor fires like that usually burn at around 600 degrees. They can go up to 1,100 degrees, that's centigrade. But it seems this could have been burning slightly hotter than that. And the fact that it was white smoke indicates that the fire was so efficient that there weren't a lot of particulates, because the black smoke is caused by fibers that are still fairly large, that are not properly burnt or not burnt to a cinder, being thrust into the air. But the white smoke seems to indicate that the flames and the heat was so intense, it was just incinerating everything, and it was going straight up into the air as white smoke. So, there's now, what do we say? So how was this caused? We believe the response was fairly slow. Now that reminds me also a little bit of Grenfell. What did they say about Grenfell Tower? The speed took everyone by surprise, and there was a slow response and perhaps not an adequate response. London, one of the world's biggest cities, who should be geared up for this. France, similarly, a big modern city in a G5 country, or G8 country, they should be equipped to deal with fire, and yet it takes them by surprise, gets quite out of hand like Grenfell before they deal with it, and the dealing with it is not particularly efficient, or more questions than answers. The next thing that I was interested in, if you watched my worldwide predictions and also the prediction I did for France, you would know that I was rather intrigued with this aspect that you found in France's chart, where you have Neptune in Scorpio conjunct Uranus in the 7th house. Not so worried about the 7th house, but I did note that that aspect was going to be triggered this year, and it was being triggered by both transit and solar arc. So I thought, well, it has to be significant. Why is this happening, and when has it happened in history? But it was rather hard to find out. So I began to just brainstorm what Neptune in Scorpio meant, and I thought poison. And as soon as I saw poison, I thought of Chernobyl. And then I looked back to the French chart and found that this was triggered in quite a big way in 1986 in April, exactly the same time Chernobyl happened. Now we're in April again. Not there's particularly anything to say about being in April, but what was the thing about Chernobyl? It affected France a lot, and there were still class actions going on until more recently, with French people having developed thyroid cancer and other sorts of cancers, who felt that they weren't properly warned by the authorities at the time of Chernobyl that nuclear or clouds of nuclear material had gathered in the Alps, and it had affected certain parts of French drinking water and the French air, and they didn't feel the government had sufficiently warned them. Now, while we think about that and poisoning, I'm coming back here to talk about the lead roof. So there were wooden beams, and the tiles on the roof of Notre Dame were made of lead. Now, at the time, because we live quite near to London at Grenfell, they did warn people, close your windows, close your door, try and, keep and protect yourself from the smoke. I wonder how much French people were warned, because I did a little bit of research on lead and what the possible problems could be with this lead burning, and they are quite significant. For example, there are 250 tons of lead that were covering the spire alone. So the wood frame supported another 210 lead roof tiles. And although the lead frame was fireproof, the wood supporting the lead frame started burning. Okay, so there was already partly a new structure, which was built of wood, but that was covered in lead. There may have been as much as 500 tons of lead on that roof, and also in some of the stained glass windows, to a lesser degree, because not many of the windows were destroyed. But let's just think about the amount of lead here. In 1993, the total was quite a while ago, 1993, 6 years ago, total French emissions of airborne lead from petrol, gas, that sort of thing, were 2,400 tons across the entirety of France, and that within a whole of a year. Now, this one fire burned nearly 500 tons just in one afternoon. So technically, lead doesn't burn, or it doesn't vaporize, but at very high temperatures, as we've talked about, this fire was very intense, really high temperatures. Microparticulates of the lead do enter the air, and at very significant levels. And these can, these levels are high enough to poison humans who are either breathing them in, or possibly they're resting on surfaces. They can go onto people's skin if you touch the surfaces, particularly they could go into water. You don't know where these things are going to, where the wind is going to take that cloud of lead, potentially extremely poisonous lead airborne particles in the cloud. Where is that going to end up? And given the sheer quantity of lead burning, I'm surprised that I haven't seen, I don't know if you guys might have, anyone talking about the potential damage to crops, to the water supply, and the direct damage of people breathing it in. So lead melts at 621 degrees. And as we know, this fire could have potentially been burning at double that. So it's highly likely lead particles entered the air to a significant extent. Someone drew the comparison with Flint, which is in Michigan, Flint, Michigan, where there's a problem with lead in the water and damaging the health of the residents. So chronic lead poisoning does lead to chronic long-term conditions. In the short term, it can cause dizziness, nausea, vomiting or flu-like symptoms. But the longer-term effects are much more dramatic and may not manifest for years. So I can see now why in the chart I saw an incident similar to Chernobyl, because the potential poisoning is exactly, there's a lot of similarities. So that was something I definitely want to look at. Now, the next thing that I thought was interesting is, prior to this event, I've been thinking how much more frequently fires are happening. It seems that there's a major fire in the news quite often. So, for example, in the United Kingdom recently, well, let's start. Just a few weeks ago, there was a major fire in the Brazilian Museum in Rio de Janeiro. Okay, the whole place was gutted. How did that happen? Again, we see a fire taking hold of a whole building, and nothing seems to be able to be done about it. Where are we with fire safety in this day and age? We don't seem to be very far. On New Year's Eve last year, there was a hotel car park fire at the Liverpool Arena. Quite a serious fire. Many cars in the car park were just wiped out. It disrupted a horse show that was going on near there. Primark built the Primark building in Belfast, which was actually even though it's Primark, was a really nice building in Belfast. That burnt down. Just earlier this year, the Ocado warehouse, well, okay, it's a warehouse, but still a massive fire rage wiped out an entire warehouse for this food delivery company, for those of you who don't know what Ocado is. And there was a school in Liverpool. Then there was the Mackintosh School of Art at the University of Glasgow, another ancient building that burned down. Some of the art, I think, was saved, but it was quite a significant fire. And, again, at a place of cultural interest, like a museum, it's the art. And the Victoria nightclub in Glasgow. There was also a garden centre up in Stokesley. There was the North Allerton fire up in the northeast of the UK. Now, apparently today, because it was over Easter, Notre Dame couldn't host the usual Easter services. Their sister church was hosting services, and apparently that sister church had a fire just recently as well. And the church in which Dan Brown set his first blockbuster, the Da Vinci Code, the Holy Sepulchre, whatever, it was where the few murders were taking place, if you remember that novel, that has recently had a fire as well. So, and there were two other significant fires in the UK of the last, I think it was either last year or the year before. London Zoo had a major fire. And there was a safari park in the UK that suffered a major fire with some animals. Not too many animals were killed, but animals had to be evacuated. So fire has, prior to this, become a theme. And one asks the question is there some sort of sabotage? Because when the fires have been followed up, the investigations have never really revealed anything to do with that. But I did hear a rather interesting theory from Mark Steele, who's done a lot of research into G5 and also into the kind of microwave wavelengths on which we receive all our mobile and Wi-Fi technology. And his theory, which also related to Grenfell, was that these more we are using in the big cities such a volume of Wi-Fi technology and this particular wavelength of electromagnetic energy that we use to run all our appliances off. This is building up a kind of radiation, a kind of energy that builds up in both, plaster, cladding, wood, and in buildings, it builds up And his theory was that fires are now going forward because of this, really go up like a match. So even if it's the kind of material that wouldn't normally burn so quickly, his theory was that because we live in basically a pea soup of Wi-Fi, because there's a type of photography where you can take a picture and it captures all the kind of electromagnetic influences that we are under, and it's extreme. So we've gone from virtually nothing in the 80s to it being ubiquitous, and especially in big cities it's going to be even more intense. And his idea was that this could cause fires to really take hold, to burn at a much higher intensity because of the energy that's stored, the radioactive energy that's stored in every part of the building, that they could just go up like that. So that's one theory, and I think it's quite an interesting one just to put out there. So we do see a lot of fires happening. Is it sabotage, or is it because once fires start now, it's very hard to arrest them and keep them under control, so they get a lot bigger than than they would have in the past? So that's definitely. And I thought, just to link back to the vlog I did on communism, where I talked about museums, for example, I had an example of in Sweden, they've been smoldering down a lot of their Viking artifacts. Now, for one, it makes them a bit of money because they sell them off, the molten material they get from them, they sell off. But on the other hand, and of course, people say they're not that bothered about the Viking. They're maybe not the most precious or sought after artifacts, so they're melting them down. But it does say to us as well, it rings a warning bell, like we said about culture. What's happening to our culture? We're melting down things from the Viking Age because we're deciding, well, yeah, they're not very useful. Here in Notre Dame, we have a building being destroyed. We have the Rio Museum being destroyed. It does seem to me a slight theme where, I don't know, there isn't maybe the desire to protect, or the required sort of perfectionism in protecting these things, and maybe there's an underlying mentality at the heart of that. Okay, so let's see. I did have a look at the 15th of April, and it turns out that it's been a day when a fair amount of significant things happened. So most recently, it was the Boston Marathon bombings. And I know that out of all the events, this one said to me two things. A lot of people online regarded it as a false flag, particularly because tweets went out in the Boston Globe warning that police were going to be doing controlled explosives in Boylston Street, just near there, and those tweets are still visible to see. So it was one of those classic cases where exercises are going on at the same time, or training exercises are happening at the exact time a terrorist attack happens. Why I also think the Boston bombing was significant is, if you remember the pictures at the time, police were going in while they were looking for Zonarev and his brother, who were the perpetrators or alleged perpetrators. It was almost like martial law. In fact, I would have called it martial law. Police were going into people's homes, literally marching them out so they could search in their homes for those brothers. So it did seem like a trial run of a quite advanced form of martial law, where totally innocent people, were manhandled out of their own homes for no reason of suspicion, just to look for those brothers. So that was stuck in my mind about that event. It was also the date of Tiananmen Square. It was the date Abraham Lincoln was shot. It was the time the sinking of the Titanic happened on this day. And there is a conspiracy theory about the sinking of the Titanic. It was just before the Federal Reserve Bank was privatized. And apparently there were a lot of wealthy people on the Titanic who had warned against that and were very against it. And just sort of conveniently, the unsinkable ship went down. Also kind of a freak event, like with Notre Dame. No one expected it. Why did it happen? Quite similar in that way. And also similar because there are allegations of the secret, secret hand, the secret society, the Illuminati kind of being behind it. Another thing that happened on this date was Hillsborough. Quite a big disaster that, if you're in the UK, you'll have heard about it continuously. It's been in the news again recently, of course, because of the anniversary. And again, what happened there? There was a cover-up. Right from the start, things weren't handled properly. So it wasn't anything to do with terrorism, but there certainly was a cover-up involved, a lot of secrecy, a lot of underhand dealings by people who should have known better, and many more people could have saved if things would have done properly. So it was a dreadful and tragic cock-up, compounded by the fact that people who should have had more integrity tried to cover up the traces afterwards. And many people who could have been saved and were actually still alive, the ambulances either couldn't get them, or there was the attitude of, oh, it's just football players, it's football violence, let's not worry about it. So it's quite a significant event. Right, some of the other things, oh yes, it was the day that Bergen-Belsen concentration camp was liberated. It was the first day of the Arab Revolt. It was also the time of the Mekong River Massacre in Vietnam. Prior to Abraham Lincoln being assassinated, this was an important date when he called for 75,000 volunteers to quell an insurrection that became the start of the US Civil War. It was when the Swedes had a major victory against the Holy Roman Empire in the 30-Year War. So I think there are quite a lot of significant things that have happened in on this date. Why would that be? It's because the sun is at 25 going into 26 degrees of Aries on this particular date, which means that it makes a conjunction with a fixed star called Al-Fag. Al-Fag, it's like an Arabic name because when the Arabs did astrology, they were very keen on the symbolism and meaning of these fixed stars. This is a star of mysteries to be revealed. The mysteries are also called by their church occult tricks. It's the genie in a bottle. Right, so we have their kind of magic mysteries. So let's have a look and see what the number 15 means. The symbol for 15 is the magician. It's a number of deep esoteric significance, and it is usually considered a lucky number unless combined with 4, and of course it's the 15th of the 4th because obviously April. It is also speaks of black magic for nefarious purposes, right, and lower levels of the occult. So when I looked at 15 and the symbolism of Al-Purg, what jumps out? Magic. Now, I'm not suggesting this is magic. I am more suggesting that possibly the use of some technology that's not quite known to the man in the street to have sparked this and caused this. I'm also wondering if there is people behind it for some reason that we are not yet able to perceive. So what I'm not thinking about that is that it's terrorism, because it doesn't seem that it's the work of a terrorist who's kind of low technology. This seems like a high technology event that could have been a long time in the planning in order to prepare the structure for this almost spontaneous combustion. So whatever is planned, it must have a meaning to the elites, or could have almost a Masonic meaning, something to do with the Illuminati. Right, so I'm not all totally big on the whole Illuminati conspiracy thing or the Mason thing. All I'm saying is that when I look at the astrological significances, that's what's kind of giving me. So I'm putting it out there to you. Do what you like with it. I know I already had suggestions on my page that these were directed weapons. And I know there's already a huge amount of curiosity about what was going on with the California wildfires, because there was literally nothing left, not a granite worktop, not a toilet, not everything was incinerated. Every tree was incinerated. So there does seem to be a new kind of fire. So you ask yourself, why on earth would the elites do this? I'm not sure. Gosh, we can only speculate. But we do know that 4 days before the spire burned down, they had removed the copper statues of the apostles from around there. So those were saved. And look how many artifacts from inside were saved. Do we know they were removed that day, or could they have actually been removed before? Because I don't remember seeing any pictures of the doors with people rushing out. In fact, the main pictures we received of the event that day was of the fire, of the outer structure of the building. Most of them were from further away. Nothing that we could really verify any of those stories we heard afterwards. One curious story that I heard is that there were 3 beehives, because Notre Dame even has a beekeeper, and the beehives survived, which seems rather odd given the intensity and ferocity of that fire. But of course, maybe they were in different locations, or maybe they were in the bell tower. That was why they survived. But I thought, funny that the beehives should survive, because when you see a beehive depicted in an emoji or a cartoon, it has the exact shape of a pyramid, and the beehive is linked to the levels of Freemasonry and also to the hive mind, or the herd mentality, which is very much talked about by people like David Icke and that sort of thing. So again, there's the link. So we have the astrological links, the number 15, the kind of events that happened in history which were pivotal, and which many of them had maybe a secret society element to them, like the murder of Abe Lincoln and all that. None of these things were random events. Many of these events, Titanic, Boston Globe, Abe Lincoln, could have been outside actors sort of orchestrating these events, so that they weren't really spontaneous, and they weren't what we think they were. There's a whole sort of other story or conspiracy behind them. So that kind of feeds into that whole thing. Okay, did I have any other information? Okay, we talked about the construction. Yes. Renovations, the energy. Yeah. Right. Absolutely. So I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover there, and about the lead tiles and all that. Just to finish off with, yes, there was construction work going on. There was also a lot of construction work going on in the Twin Towers ahead of that happening, wasn't there? I can remember listening late one night to Talk Sport, and someone phoned in and they said that they used to work in an office in the Twin Towers. And they said what not a lot of people know is that many of the floors weren't occupied. It wasn't really a sought after building or buildings, both of them. It wasn't a sought after place to work anymore. The plumbing was up to shit. The Wi-Fi, or they didn't have Wi-Fi then, but the broadband or whatever they were using was really antiquated. So it wasn't geared up for new computer systems. The electrics had gone to pot. The wiring wasn't great. So not many people really wanted to rent office space there because the facilities weren't state of the art, and there were better places for running a business, especially coming into the age of internet and computer. There were better places to run your businesses than there. So there were many floors that were empty. And this guy said that that weekend prior to the 9/11, which happened on a Tuesday, there was going to be a power down, which meant all the power was shut off so that they could do maintenance work. So as a result, people who were running businesses had to go into their offices, make sure all their computers were turned off so no information was lost during the power down. And he said that's why not as many people were killed as could have been killed, because people had the day off on the Tuesday because they'd been working on the weekend to prepare for the power down, which was presumably on the Sunday. But he said that prior to sort of the 6 weeks running up to it, he would be sitting at his desk and he would hear noises on the floor above. And he thought it was really odd because that floor was empty, and he would have all this dust build up on his desk. It was almost like there was construction work going on the floor above. And so he decided one day, I wonder what's going on up there. It's supposed to be free office space. What the hell are they doing? So he went up the stairs and had a look and saw an enormous amount of machinery and cabling, and he wasn't able to investigate further, but it always stuck in his mind that there was a lot of work going on there. And he did say that there were often workmen in the stairwell and going up and down, and a huge amount of work going on in various floors. So not to hop on about conspiracy theories, this really isn't a conspiracy channel. I think other people do conspiracies extremely well, and I'll leave it to them. But I'm really going to put to you, like I said in my title, the anomalies, right? The facts, like the burning of the lead, right? And then some of the symbolism from which we can try and say, well, what was this? So from my information that I've put together in this, it doesn't really seem that it's a low-tech terrorist just pulling off a church fire. Although, of course, we do know that church fires are becoming more prevalent all over France, but they're usually on a kind of low intelligence, low tech level, right? A low, what else would you call it? No, I suppose it is like a low technology level. This seems a very, very high technology level. So one doesn't know. I know that people are circulating a picture of a man on the roof and there's a spark and that, but you ask yourself, that was prior to the fire starting. Who took that picture? Was it taken from a drone or a helicopter? And why were they taking that picture at that particular point? And then you have to ask when that picture was taken and why that person was in the sky taking pictures of the roof at that point, because the fire hadn't started yet. So why were they there? So that's what I would question about that photograph. And I'd say that could be misdirection, as could the other one of the man sort of running across the bell tower. It seems to me that this is something significant. And I do think, just to finish on that note, Macron was due to give a speech that day in connection with the discussions that were ongoing about the yellow vests. As a result, a lot of reporters were in town, plus the fact that being Easter, loads of tourists were there. So it was very convenient because they had press on the ground ready to go with commentary and pictures. Plus, they had a lot of people on the ground, for example, politicians and members of the public holidaying who would be able to take pictures. So they kind of guaranteed that this event and the pictures from this dramatic event would be flashed around the world immediately because of the volume of people there, plus the fact it was, nice weather. So there you go. I will leave you to draw your own conclusions, but I think I've given you a lot of food for thought on a number of different levels. So I'll watch the space. If anything comes to light, I'll update you. But in the moment, keep looking out for fires because there's some really weird ones going on. End.